Heartbeat from spooky Maryland. Something was going on. Jason felt it in his bones. Polly was too happy, too cheerful all the time. No woman could be that upbeat and still be faithful to her husband. Of this he was morally certain. It maddened Jason that he could never catch Polly flirting with another man, or even talking with one on the phone. She stayed near him at parties and local charity events, and they sat together holding hands each Sunday morning at church. All their friends and neighbors thought they were completely devoted to one another. But he knew better. Polly had married beneath her class, of course. Her parents had always hated him. They still joked about how she gave up marrying her high school sweetheart, who became a lawyer, to marry him. Polly thought they were kidding, but Jason knew they weren't. He'd seen the sideways glances they threw at him when she wasn't looking, and they still had Polly's prom photo with the other man up on the living room wall. Jason sat down to a delicious warm meal every night. That couldn't be right. And Polly sang to herself as she washed up afterward. What kind of woman could be cheerful doing dishes, and thus she was sure that in the near future she would never wash a plate again. As Jason read the newspaper after dinner, he would listen to her chatting on the phone with her mother or one of the church ladies. Strain as he might, Jason never heard anything that hinted of a secret romance. It drove him crazy. Life was not this perfect. It couldn't be. There was a flaw somewhere, and he was determined to find it. Maybe Polly was seeing the milkman, or the greengrocer. Jason started getting up early in order to see who it was that delivered the milk. Much to his disappointment, the fellow that creaked up to their front door looked as if he'd been born several centuries ago and had kept living out of sheer stubbornness. The remains of his white hair were thin and greasy. He had so many wrinkles it was hard to tell where his eyes were, and he stooped over so low that he had to drop his hand only a few inches to place the bottle on the doorstep. Just in case, he asked the old man his name. Joe Smith. Ha! Obviously an alias. Still, he looked a bit too creaky to be courting a beautiful, classy lady like Polly. Jason started doing the food shopping and checked out every single mail in the local grocery store. They were either antediluvian relics, like the milkman, or still in diapers. None seemed the type to sweep his wife off her feet. Jason grumbled to himself as he stomped home. Polly met him at the door with a kiss, and she'd made a plate full of his favorite cookies while he was gone just to thank him for doing the shopping. Yep. There was definitely something going on. In mid-September, his father-in-law called and jovially asked if Jason would like to help fix up his old car. He agreed at once, rather pleased the old man thought so well of his abilities. They joked around as they poked and prodded at the old car, sliding under it skillfully like a couple of grease monkeys. Jason was working underneath the car when he heard his father-in-law call, "Hiya, Hank." Hank was the name of Polly's high school boyfriend. Jason rolled out from under the car and quickly stood up. "Hello, Mr. Parker." A tall, handsome young man had come to the entrance of the driveway to shake hands. Jason's father-in-law beamed. "It's nice to see you. How are Helen and the kids?" "Fine, just fine," Hank said with a smile. "Say, have you met my son-in-law? This is Polly's husband, Jason. They just got married about this time last year, isn't that right, son?" his father-in-law said, pulling him forward and introducing the two men. Jason gripped Hank's hand so hard the lawyer blanched a bit, and massaged it behind his back once they dropped the clinch. "Hank and his family just moved back to town," his father-in-law continued, oblivious to the rage shaking his son-in-law. "You joined Ted Mallory's firm, right?" Hank nodded and elaborated on the topic for several minutes before continuing on his way. Jason kept his cool and went back to working on the car as if there were nothing wrong. But inside he was triumphant. Now he knew. He knew why Polly was so happy all the time. Her parents must have told her that Hank was coming home, and she was planning on running off with him. Jason disregarded the notion that Hank would remain faithful to his wife and children after meeting Polly again. Why would he want someone else if he could have Polly? Enraged with jealousy, he was waiting in the kitchen when Polly got back from her church meeting and began roaring out his anger as soon as she shut the door. "What are you talking about?" Polly yelled when he paused for breath. "Why would I want to be with anyone else but you? I love you." But Jason was beyond reason. He snatched up a newly sharpened steak knife, howling, "You've cut out my heart. Now I'll cut out yours." He leapt around the table toward his cowering wife and ripped her still beating heart out of her chest with a knife. Blood streaming everywhere, he sailed out the back door into the dark night and flung her heart, still thumping warmly against his hand, over the side of the bridge that spanned the creek next to their home and into the swirling water beneath. He cleaned up the blood-stained house with extreme care and buried Polly's body deep in the woods outside of town. Then he wrote several letters, carefully mimicking Polly's handwriting, and mailed them to himself and her parents. Within a few days, everyone in town believed that Polly had been secretly seeing a man from the next town that she'd met through her charity work, and that they had run away together. Polly's parents were heartbroken and apologized again and again to Jason for their daughter's cruelty. Jason was careful to play the role of a grieved and betrayed husband. And he had been betrayed. He was convinced of it in his soul. He knew that Polly had decided to get back together with that lawyer, even though it hadn't actually happened yet. He went out to the bridge later that evening and watched the dark water swirling around in satisfaction. Polly had gotten what she deserved, he thought. As he breathed in the night air, he became aware of a vibration under his feet. Da-dum. 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 The sound was so faint that Jason could barely hear it at first. It floated softly through the air, a rhythmic thudding that trapped everything else in its beat. Da-dum. 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 Jason's hands began to tingle as he recognized the soft thudding sound. It was the same beat he had felt when he held Polly's bleeding heart in his hands as he ran from their house to this bridge. Da-dum. 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 The heartbeat grew louder as he stood frozen beside the railing of the bridge. Da-dum. 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 The heartbeat rang in his ears, thundering so loud that he was afraid it would wake the neighbors. "No!" Jason shouted. "No, Polly, no!" He clapped his hands over his ears and ran back to the house, slamming the door against the terrible, relentless beat that pulsed from underneath the bridge. He couldn't hear the sound in the kitchen, but the floorboards seemed to vibrate slightly under his feet to a slow, steady rhythm. He fled into the living room and picked up the newspaper, trying to regain some semblance of normalcy by returning to his nightly routine.